motion?
Senator Brazeau, are you going to oppose the motion?
Are you here to oppose the motion?
Senator Brazeau, are you going to oppose the motion today?
Just happy to be at work.
Venez travailler, monsieur le rapport. Peut-être un petit mot en français, sénateur Brazeau, s'il vous plaît.
Je suis content d'être au travail.
Comment vous sentez-vous?
Pretty dramatic moment on the Hill today as independent Senator Patrick Brazeau, no longer Conservative, booted out of the caucus last week, showed up for work today, but he wasn't there very long. The Senate passed a motion forcing Brazeau to take a leave of absence. He voted against that, but he will continue to receive his salary, somewhere in the neighborhood of $130,000 per year. Adequate response to charges of sexual assault and assault against Brazeau last week. Remember, charged, innocent until proven guilty. Nonetheless, is it enough to preserve the dignity of the Senate? Lots of questions about the Senate, and the Power Panel will take some of them up. We'll also talk about CETA. First, political scientist, author, former advisor to Stephen Harper. He's in Calgary, and he's been there for a while. Tom Flanagan. Good to see you, Tom.
Hi.
He'll be watching the State of the Union as well. Amanda Alvaro, Narrative Advocacy Media, is in TO. Here with me in studio, Robin McLaughlin of Summa Strategies and the CBC's Greg Weston. Let's start with the Dr. Weston himself. What did you make of Brazeau's appearance today and the action the Senate take? Is it enough to cauterize the wound?
Well, it's all they can do. We still have a presumption of innocence. At the same time, the Senate did not want to get stuck in the situation where this was Chinese water torture, where there'd be another detail and then another detail, another detail. So they've hit a happy medium, and this happens to people all the time. Something happens in their work. It happens to police officers when they get into trouble. They're under investigation. You are put on leave with pay. This will be leave with pay. Hopefully this will not last as long as the 4 years that Senator Levine was, which brought the great line. I thought that he had simply gone from doing nothing in the Senate to doing officially nothing in the Senate and getting paid for it. So the ordinary person watching this say, oh my God, well, now we're going to pay them. Now we're going to pay him to stay away from the Senate. Where will this end? But really, this is all the Senate could do, and they've done the right thing.
Tom Flanagan, what's your take on how they've treated the Brazeau situation, and then the overall impact that this has not only on the Senate itself for Canadians, but politically for all parties, how this is playing in?
Yeah. Well, I agree with Greg that this is the right course of action. I mean, it's all the Senate could do. It's all the Senate should do. In all walks of life, when somebody is accused of something, you don't throw them under the bus immediately. If you're talking about a job and so forth, you wait and see what the facts are and have the trial. So, yeah, sometimes there is some expense to that and there is some delay, but that's the price of observing the rule of law. Obviously it's not good for the Senate. It's not good for politicians in general, but there is such a thing as human weakness, and people, in the past and in the future, there will be cases where people are accused of doing wrong things. That's part of life. I think voters are savvy enough to recognize that you can't judge an entire system or institution by the travails of one person.
Amanda, what's your take on this? Because obviously, again, we got to separate. There's a couple of stories about the Senate, Senator Harb, Senator Duffy in terms of expenses. Senator Brazeau's a very different story. I mean, although he's involved in the expense issue as well and the residency. What's the impact of this?
Well, I think that there is significant impact, but it's interesting. There's been a lot of questions around the actions of the Senate, the limitations of the Senate, what they can and cannot do. Canadians probably overwhelmingly feel like he shouldn't be paid for this leave of absence, but they're constrained by what the limitations allow for them to do. But there's another question, and that question is, is this the character flaw of one person, or are these ongoing stories that have made headlines over the course of the last couple of weeks sort of endemic of the type of appointments, the hyper-partisan appointments being made by Prime Minister Harper? There's always been a significant amount of partisanship in these appointments, and that's understandable. But at the same time, we used to reward, I think, public service and people who felt committed to public service and the dignity and ethics of the upper chamber. Now it feels like we're rewarding people based on the fundraising efforts to the party. And what we're left with are individuals who are not upholding all of the integrity of what this upper chamber should represent. And I think that's a question that more and more Canadians are going to be asking about as these stories continue to unfold.
Well, as Greg said, this may be all the Senate this may be all the Senate can do right now, but it's certainly not going to uphold the dignity of the Senate. Dignity of the Senate is as much damaged by the behaviors of Liberal and Conservative senators such as Mac Harb and such as Mike Duffy, who are abusing the system on taxpayer dollars. Let's remember that if this was an average Canadian at their job, I mean, these senators have been accused essentially of fraud. They've been lying for their own personal benefit. If this was an average Canadian at their job, they wouldn't just be fired, they would probably be charged. So this is from a
If
government.
it's proven, be
if
careful.
it's proven, for sure. But so the actions of Mr. Brazeau, which, and let's remember that there were accusations of this type of wrongdoing in the past before he was appointed by Mr. Harper. So the judgment of the Prime Minister is also in question, and certainly in his appointment.
All right, last word on this. Oh, okay. Tom first, because I know I heard some comments from Tom, and then Greg. Real quick, Tom.
Well, Amanda's particularly entertaining today, taking us back to the period of the wise liberal utopia when only philosopher kings were appointed to the Senate. Look, we all know it wasn't that way, so let's drop the partisan talking points for once.
All right, Greg.
Fastest way to clean up the Senate would be to open their books. Remember the Auditor General, Sheila Fraser, the past Auditor General, tried to kick open the doors. She tried for an entire 10 years. She finally got them open just a crack, and lo and behold, found some irregularities. But if we really want to start to restore any sense of confidence in the Senate, it's not going to happen because of Mike Duffy or Mac Harb or Senator Brazeau here. It's going to happen when someone goes in and opens the books and says, okay, everything's transparent, and people who had things to hide are exposed, and they're gone.
It's interesting.
And that's the only thing that's going to happen.
I want to get to this seat issue, but
I got to go with Tom on this one, Fourth Amanda. I mean, Liberals have been quite quiet about these scandals. You haven't heard the Liberals raise this stuff in the House of Commons, and the reason for that, half of their caucus comes from the Senate. It was a Chrétien appointee, Mac Harb, who started this whole process. This is the House that's supposed to be providing sober second thought, and I think we're seeing some of the judgment and poor judgment that is impacting the ability for sober second thought.
If there was ever an NDP government, that may one day be, an NDP government would also have to appoint senators.
Fair point,
Well, no, that's
Evan.
not necessarily
Fair
true.
point.
The NDP government would have to figure out what it's going to do with the Senate, and that's what Mr. Mulcair was talking about in those comments today, which means working with the provinces, something the Conservatives don't like to do, to figure out how can we abolish this undemocratic $92 million waste of taxpayer dollars.
All right, let me. I know that's the line now, but it's a little more complicated in government, but maybe not. We'll see what happens.
No, it is absolutely.
They all say that on the way in the door, and then they say, "Wow, I like this. I like this life phase." Yeah, right. Yeah.
All right.
I may consider an appointment.
Right, well, that's right. I think he just put his resume on the table.
I'm kidding.
Here are some comments. I want to talk about CETA, funding for a group called Christian Crossroads. On the website, they just pulled this down after a CP report. They compared homosexuality to bestiality. They said they're perversion, turning from the true and or proper purpose of sexual intercourse, misusing it, abusing it, such as pedophilia, homosexuality, lesbianism, sadism, masochism, transvesticism, bestiality. Okay, now this is a group working in Uganda where gays and lesbians are targeted. The government said it would investigate before continuing the funding. We talked about this yesterday on the program. By last night, CETA sent out a statement saying they've done the investigation and that the review was done. The organization, CETA now says, and Minister Fantino says, complies with all the requirements. Is it enough for an organization to deliver aid, even if it has that kind of thing on its website? Today, at a Foreign Affairs Committee on Mali, John Baird and Fantino were asked about it. Here's what John Baird said about it.
The suggestion that anyone politically or in the public service level at CETA, at DFATE, would share or endorse the kind of offensive and mean-spirited statements that appeared on a website, I want to, categorically on behalf of the government say we completely reject those sentiments. And I can say that if there's, any evidence that anyone receiving a grant from the Government of Canada is using that money to spread hateful or mean-spirited or offensive practices, it will be put to an end immediately.
That's what Barrett said. But Fantino said, well, we've actually going to continue to give this group money. So it raises questions about how money is given. Remember, this goes back to 1999. Liberal governments also gave this same group money since 1999. But Greg, this is the question. Can you separate, the money we give you to dig wells is doing really well, but at the same time on your website you compare homosexuality to bestiality. Now, we give to lots of religious groups, Canada as a country, but How does Canada draw the line there, and did Fantino do it the right way?
Well, the problem is, Evan, started long before this. It started when this government started to make judgments on the agencies that were receiving aid, and if they didn't happen to agree with them, for instance, we all know the most, probably the one people will remember most was Kairos,
That's right.
which was doing a lot of work in the Middle East. Apparently was not quite pro-Israel enough. That was the claim, and suddenly is losing its funding. That was what started this whole thing going. Then they started looking at other agencies. So once you start down that road where you connect foreign aid to what the philosophy is of the group that is delivering that aid, including all of these religious groups, it's a very slippery slope. And I think what we've ended up in here now is one where if you judged it on the same basis as Kairos, from what John Baird has said, they should have been cut off by midnight last night, but lo and behold, they said they are in compliance. Now, in compliance means they are taking the aid and they are using it for the purposes that they're saying they're using it. That's what's in their contract. It's the government that's not making the value judgment in this case.
All right, let's go around. Tom, let me start with you. Where do you draw the line? The government funds lots of religious groups, so clearly it's not judging every religious group. But is there a line where the government should not separate the certain beliefs propagated on a website from the group's activities? And if so, where is that line, and did it cross here?
Yeah, let me just back up for viewers who may not be fully familiar. Crossroads is an extremely well-established Canadian ministry, sort of a Pentecostal foundation. It's been broadcasting for more than 50 years, I think. It broadcasts 100 Huntley Street and other television programs. This is not a fringe player. This is a mainstream player in Canadian religion, has been for a long time. Their view of homosexuality, I guess, is the sort of received biblical view that would have been non-controversial up to about 25 years ago. It also was the view of the psychiatric profession and was in its manual. So we've been in a time of change, and I guess they haven't fully changed yet. But I think the line for dispensing public funds to an organization in the field is what is it doing in the field, not what it may or may not have had on a Canadian website.
No,
but
that's a
so
misunderstanding.
John
Any
Baird,
evidence
I'm trying to get at this because I mean I don't want to get on people taking personal, where they draw the line here. But
well, you asked me where I draw the line. I'm telling you where I draw the line.
Well, Fantino draws the line one place. This is what I'm trying to get at. There's clearly a confusion between where Fantino drew the line and where Baird drew the line. Baird called those comments offensive, mean-spirited, and anybody that shared or endorsed those kind of offensive remarks wouldn't get funding. So
so they were corrected and they took them down. But so that's one thing. But then the other issue is, should this group be part of Canada's foreign aid program? I think depends upon what they're doing. If they were tied in with the persecution of gay people in Uganda, that would be a totally different story. But if they are carrying out their foreign aid mission of digging wells and whatever else they do, I don't see why you would cut off that money because you disagree with their religious views.
But Tom,
unless, of course, you have an anti-religious agenda, which I think is true of many of the critics here.
Okay, hold on.
Not any religious organization involved in Canada's foreign aid at all.
Okay, hang on. Let's get Tom saying this is an anti-religious agenda, so what's your take on this?
This isn't about religion versus gay rights. This isn't. The government's drawing an artificial line between the guiding principles of an organization and the development work that it does. That's a fundamental misunderstanding of the role of religion in development. Religion plays and faith plays an enormous role in international aid around the world, and largely a positive role. So to misunderstand that and suggest that there's somehow you can draw this artificial line between the guiding principles, and let's remember, this organization likens sexual identity to the abuse of children. Let's be clear about that. You cannot draw that line. That's a misunderstanding of what calls these people to the work they do, what calls people of great faith that do great work. So it's not just disrespect to the LGBT community around the world, it's disrespect to the religious groups on the ground that are guided by positive religious values. This group is not a group that deserves our funding. This does not reflect Canadian values, and the government speaking out of two sides of its mouth here is
I got less than a minute for Amanda. Go.
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, Minister Baird was, I think, appropriately forceful on this issue today. And Crossroads came out with a pretty detailed and very descriptive view. They put it on the newswire. They wanted the media to know that they were not behind the comments that had been found on their website. It doesn't make those comments correct, but it does raise the issue of whether or not you can marry and should uphold Canadian values and then just blindly fund religious organizations without doing the due diligence that's required to understand the underpinnings of those organizations. And I think that's where the challenge occurs. This organization is doing good work in Uganda. You don't want to take away from the good work that's being done, but at the same time, it does reflect the must reflect Canadian values on the ground domestically and abroad.
But I mean, how people engage with local populations, what motivates them. I mean, that's what I'm talking about, is this misunderstanding of how the role of religion in development work. And this is an organization that has fought LGBT rights advancement in Canada at home, whether it's on same-sex marriage advocacy.
Greg wants to jump in.
Well, we wouldn't be sending, if we were making those kind of value judgments about delivering the aid, we wouldn't be in Uganda, for starters. Uganda is a place that basically kills gay people. I mean, they're outlawed, the government. So, look, you either make those judgments or you let these religious organizations do some of them, some very incredible work in these places. The problem is this government has already started to make those judgments a long time ago, and you can't just start making the judgments for some groups and then you get to one and say, oh, well, actually, that's a Christian organization, they're okay, let's carry on. So Baird said, well, sure, exactly, this is it. So they've got to make up their mind. The problem here is with the government, not with the aid organizations.
I think that the judgment that the government made with Kairos, that it was promoting groups that were, acting contrary to Canadian national interests by promoting terrorism, at least indirectly. That's quite different from what the religious belief might be of an organization. That had to do with Kairos, had to do with action.
Excuse me, Tom.
That was such a stretch.
Mm-hmm. These are well-proven groups, whether it's Kairos, Development and Peace, Rights and Democracy. The government has chosen not to fund, and now they're funding groups that have liken homosexuality to pedophilia.
Listen, the politics of it, this is a very, very sensitive topic. We'll come back to it. I got to leave it there, though, for today. Tom Flanagan, Amanda Alvaro, Robin McLaughlin, and Greg Weston. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Pardon me. A reminder of our ballot box question. Should Patrick Brazeau continue to be paid while on a forced leave from the Senate? Let us know what you think. What is it? About 80% of you say no right now. Go to the ballot box section of our Facebook page, cbcnews.ca, scan the QR code at the bottom of the screen. That'll zap you to the ballot box. If you have comments on anything you hear on the show, be part of the conversation on Facebook. Hit me with a tweet directly at Evan Solomon CBC, or with a cough drop. We all seem to be fighting these darn coughs all winter. Still ahead on Power and Politics, why is the government giving money to a group that listed homosexuality as a perversion and a sin? The Power panel's been on it, so will MPs Deepak Oberoi, Paul Dewar, and Dominic O'Blon next. We're also on top of this developing story just outside Los Angeles. These are live shots now from that standoff in Big Bear, California. Police have surrounded a cabin where they suspect ex-LAPD officer Chris Dorner has holed up. He's wounded 2 officers allegedly. They are now in hospital. There's some reports that he's holding hostages. Police are here road blocking roads leading into that area, checking cars for the fugitive. Stay with us.